This is a massive subject, the world after Gaza. There are different areas that address this subject. Nonetheless, this paper addresses specific aspects of Israel's conduct during the war of genocide, particularly from two perspectives. First, what some consider that Israel is now embodying, or it embodies, the end of the rules-based order, not only the International Humanitarian Law, but the entire set of rules established as part and consequences of the Holocaust and the World War II in particular. Second, that I will discuss, will address one of the reasons that has enabled Israel to persist in its genocide war until now, while paying particular attention to the decision-making process during the presidencies of Joe Biden and the second presidency of President Trump, and other factors Israel uses to influence the political decision in Western countries in particular, in addition to other countries. The paper will argue that some of these aspects require more detailed study, and that they often repeat the claim in the Arab media that Israel is the spearhead of the United States and Western countries in general is either erroneous or at least inaccurate. Even if these interests, some of these interests have converged between the United States and Israel currently or historically, but not necessarily in the political areas as related to the genocide war and any other context. Perhaps what distinguishes Israel's case from other countries or other wars that were considered as genocidal or close to, for example, the ongoing war in Sudan, including the massacres committed there, for instance, forced migration or displacement, or the genocide that was considered then in Rwanda in 1994 between two ethnic groups, the Hutus, who perpetrated the massacres, and the Tutsi, who were largely the victims. What is different is that these countries are considered underdeveloped in terms of their political system and are characterized by weak governance and near absence of the rule of law in these countries. They are, in parentheses, are not civilized states that respect international humanitarian law and the rules of war in general. In contrast, Israel is considered, in parentheses, Western, despite its geographic location, and also a democracy, and it is not expected to behave like underdeveloped states. Many parentheses, but this is needed. This, incidentally, applies to Australia and New Zealand, among other countries which are considered Western countries, despite their geographical location in the Southern Hemisphere. And as I say here directly, that this is a pure hypocrisy, because the reason that the United States and most Western countries remain silent until recently about the genocidal war in Gaza and the claim that the world order is governed by rules and that Israel is a Western and democratic state has political and other reasons that I will address later on. But what the genocide war did in Gaza is that it exposed this hypocrisy. That is, there is a rules-based world order where some announced its demise. And in reality, this is well known and it's nothing new here. And what happened is that Israel itself has refuted this claim. But what is true is that the demonstrations that took place in various countries around the world, including the United States and most of Western countries, have expressed an overwhelming demand that there should be a rules-based world order. The rules are known, and the countries that contributed to establishing them or are normally committed to them should actually abide by them. This is one of the demands. However, the practical reality was not unknown. On various occasions, for example, several African countries protested that Western countries, particularly the United States, or including the United States, primarily sought to apply the International Humanitarian Law to a number of countries in the Global South, including African countries, or to countries that are considered hostile, a clear case of double standards. And this was widely known. Just to give an example, when I was teaching undergraduate students, some of them first-year university students, and in this context, I used to ask, do countries build their foreign policies based them on lofty ideals, noble goals, and lofty values? And the answer was always no. They base them on interests. Despite this situation, and regardless of the behavior of the United States and Western countries in general, there is a future and current need to respect the rules of war as a result of the genocide war in Gaza. There are new groups that were formed by countries or community activists or organizations lobbying to make Western countries in particular uphold their stated commitments and obligations. For example, in January 2025, a group of 8 countries called the Hague Group was formed to coordinate efforts to hold Israel accountable. Also, an organization called the Law for Palestine organization coordinates the work of 200 organizations seeking to hold Israel accountable for its crimes in Gaza. Several other groups working towards the same goal. These organizations represent a practical response to the demands of demonstrations in various countries around the world for Israel to be held accountable for the crimes it is committing in Gaza. This is, of course, a struggle that has had some impact, if not a major one. For example, President Trump stated in late last October, stated that Israel became internationally isolated and that if it did not stop the war in Gaza, the world will stop that war. Despite Israel's acceptance to Trump's plan to end the war, as you know, Israel continues waging war in various forms, although selectively in some areas, and the United States has done nothing about it. Perhaps the reason for that is that President Trump has not abandoned the idea of Gaza Rivera in parts of Gaza Strip. According to some sources, the idea originated with businessman and president's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, who convinced Trump to invest in Gaza Strip and profit after the war. This endeavor is known, according to the phrase of Naomi Klein, as the disaster capitalism, meaning that the pursuit by American European companies to profit from the outcomes of wars, as happened in Iraq, with oil contracts after the regime's fall, including the Iraq's Kurdistan. I previously indicated that I would address some of the reasons that have allowed Israel to be said to now embody the end of the rules-based order. However, what Israel has actually done is revealing the selective application of these rules. That is, when it serves its interests. Now, I will point to some of the well-known reasons that have enabled Israel to continue its genocide war for so long, despite global opposition and the protests that have not significantly affected the position of many European countries, particularly the United States. I will not delve here into the old discussion that if the reason for its ability is that it's a strategic ally of the United States, or it is the power of the Zionist lobbies, as, for instance, pointed out by John Mearsheimer and Stephen Walt, who argue not only in their famous book on the role of Zionist lobbies, but also now, as Mearsheimer stated recently on Al Jazeera's interview program named Interview for 10 days and other interviews. However, I leave one question that must be answered. Why does the United States need Israel as a strategic ally for its interests in the Middle East, given that it has military bases in all Gulf countries without any exception, in addition to its military bases in Iraq, Jordan, and Syria, and even before the fall of the Al-Assad's regime? Particularly, I'm referring to a Tanaf base in southern Syria on the Jordanian-Syrian borders. My question then, why does the United States need Israel while it is protecting its interests in the Middle East by itself? Just a question. Then, one of the well-known reasons for Israel's power, particularly in the Western countries, is the exploitation of the Holocaust for political purposes and the accusation of anti-Semitism stemming in part from the Holocaust. I say partially or in part because of the long history of the West, its history of hostility towards Jews, that is, European anti-Semitism, and also resulting from the guilt complex, especially in the 20th century and beyond. We saw how this accusation was used excessively, yet effectively, in the first year of the war of genocide against young protesters in the American campuses and elsewhere, to the point that it became trivialized through overuse. For example, hearing a phrase like Free Palestine offends the feelings of some students in the universities. See how sensitive. And offending their feelings is anti-Semitic. In addition, Zionist capital plays a significant role in supporting congressional candidates and in other occasions, as we saw in the threats made against major US universities not to donate to these groups as they used to do. And they made that conditional to change the internal bylaws for these universities to prevent demonstrations supporting Palestine because they were supporters for these universities. And they considered many of these demonstrations as anti-Semitic. We witnessed this, how this external pressure led to the resignation of several presidents of leading universities, including Universities of Columbia, Harvard, Cornell, and Pennsylvania, and other universities. The Israel and the global Zionist movement employ other methods, some known when they become public and others less so. These include the vicious personal attack and blackmail, as happened with the judge Richard Goldson, if you remember his report, famous report, where a fierce campaign was waged against him, including incitement against him and his family, ultimately leading him to retract in an article on the subject significant portions of the report that is critical of Israel. We know other similar instances of blackmail in the Palestinian case, just to mention one. And here I point in October 2011, President Mahmoud Abbas met with Khalid Mash'al, the head of Hamas political bureau, and an agreement was subsequently announced to work as partners under one roof, as reported by the press at that time. As well known, Israel intensified its efforts to separate the West Bank from Gaza and prevent reapproachment and conciliation between Palestinian Authority and Hamas. And it was expected that a news like this, Israel will seek to foil it and undermine it. Few months later, a congressional subcommittee held what was called hearings with experts on the Palestinian situation. The primary focus of these hearings was corruption within the Palestinian Authority, with particular attention to Abu Mahmoud Abbas' sons and their alleged role in this matter. The transcript of these hearings is still available online under, I can give you the title. The title is Chronic Kleptocracy, Corruption Within the Palestinian Political Establishment. Chronic Kleptocracy, Corruption Within the Palestinian Political Establishment. You can Google that and you'll get a report in English within small font. It's not well known, this report. Then things deteriorated between them. Finally, I need just 1.5 minutes, please. I mention a little known aspect. This means that it was not studied in detail through information, public information. But what's more importantly to be studied, that it requires interviewing specific individuals who possess information on this subject, and for obvious reasons, they have not written about it. I'm referring here to the influence of Israel and Zionist lobbies on key appointments in the US administration, including the National Security Council and their presidential advisors in general. I believe this particularly applies to the Biden and Trump as well. Even if there are differences between the two administrations, because both of them, they could have stopped the genocide war at early time by using the tools they have, such as stopping the ongoing armament that enabled Israel to continue with the genocide for 2 years and more, 2 months. Whereas the belief that the president can make any decision he wants is largely incorrect. The truth is that the president, in the sense I am referring to here, is not a single entity when it comes to decision making. I'm referring to the United States. Decision-making is not confined to the presidency, but at the institutions like universities. It's generally based on discussion around the issue, even if in some cases that the president might have a strong, clear stance on a particular matter, such as Netanyahu's position on the importance of continuing the war. albeit in different forms. This is something known by Israel's supporters. That's why they strive to appoint, as much as possible, appoint specific individuals to sensitive positions. This is not a speculation. In April this year, an audio recording was leaked of AIPAC's CEO, the most powerful and largest in the United States. His name is Elliot Brandt. He was speaking in the recording in a meeting with a number of people, speak about his strong relations, close relations with 3 current members of the National Security Council during President Trump. He indicates that the beginning of the relation, that it began with the financial and publicity support for their congressional campaigns, with the hope they have a future in high-ranking positions in the administration, also with their backing. The source, I have the source for this. It's not New York Times, or else you'll not find this. But there is a website called Gray Zone. You can find that. Or even you can look it up. AIPAC official brags about influence in Trump administration. He named 3 persons who are there in office. These 3 people, Marco Rubio and Michael Waltz, the director of National Security Council, and John Radcliffe, the director of the CIA. He also pointed out that this relation enables him to know the discussions, internal discussions within the National Security Council, enabling him to intervene if they were detrimental to Israel. This is not well studied, but it has to be studied in particular. Supporting people to access sensitive decision-making positions. It's not easy to gather information, but I said through interviews, maybe people don't want to speak. This case, because it was leaked in the recording, and there is a previous recording during George Bush. In conclusion, most world countries, due to the genocide war and starvation war, witnessed a beginning of revolution and rejection towards such atrocities. This is a result of shared moral sense among most people. This is an important point, with the exception of Israel. Therefore, it was not surprising that Israel was compared to the Nazi movement by many writers. The reality is that genocide or ethnic cleansing, or both of them, are an integral part of the Zionist project in Palestine. How else could a state be established for Jews in a land where the majority of its indigenous population opposed their expulsion? This was understood by a number of pro-Zionist Jewish writers at the beginning of the 20th century, including later on by David Ben-Gurion. Thus, many of you, or all of you, Smotrich once said at a Knesset session that he regretted Ben-Gurion had not completed the mission. The entire Palestinian cause or issue due to Gaza will remain on the global agenda for years to come. And the global boycott, divestment, and sanctions BDS movement will expand, but serious accountability for Israel's actions requires sustainable and persistent global organization. We are now witnessing the beginnings of this, much also depends on the Palestinian role, both within the occupied territories and in diaspora. There are 7 million Palestinians in diaspora, what they are doing. I know many of them are active, but organization is important in the effort to hold Israel accountable. We have this. The elements for this exist, and they are insufficient as they are. And a solution must also be envisioned. What to do? I'm not proposing, but at that time they need it. But this is impossible while the Palestinian political field remains fragmented. Hence comes the importance of rebuilding the Palestine Liberation Organization. It is the one that brings all the Palestinian representatives to have a busy agenda, no doubt. And so, a generation passes and a generation comes and the struggle continues. Thank you.